Hello, hi-fi friends. I have reviewed a lot of gear since starting this channel, but I've yet to review a preamp that does something as weird as this. Let me tell you all about the T13 preamp from Douk Audio next. Now, a few weeks ago, Douk Audio asked me if I'd be interested in reviewing more of their products, and I asked them to send me a list. And one thing really caught my eye, and that was the T13 preamp. And it caught my eye for one specific reason. It has the ability to connect two input sources, one of which is a phono for your turntable. Now, Douk Audio sent me the T13 for free to review, but they're not compensating me for this review, nor do they have any input in my opinions on this wild and wacky little box. Now, as I mentioned, I love a preamp with more than one input. It just adds a lot more functionality to your amp's connectivity. And that's what we're looking for in a preamp, right? We want a box that we can connect to our amplifier that's going to give us volume control, and it's going to give us the ability to select between multiple sources. Now, as I mentioned earlier with the T13, there's two inputs, RCA and phono. So if you're someone that has been hoping to easily connect a turntable to a Class D amplifier via a preamp, the T13 could be an interesting option. Now, the RCA input could also be used for a wireless streamer like a Weem Mini or a Weem Pro, and that's important because there's no Bluetooth offered with the T13, which I actually prefer. I'm just not a big Bluetooth streamer in general, so it's kind of nice to see that left off. Now, there is a volume control on the T13. This is where things start to get a little weird and a little wacky for me. The volume control is located on the rear of the unit. I know, I thought that was strange as well. So my entire life, if I've ever wanted to adjust the volume on a product, I've just done so right on the front. But with the T13, you got to reach over and adjust it that way. I don't know, is that something that you would find annoying or something that you would get used to? I think if you're using it on a desktop system, it's probably not that annoying. But if you're using it in a home stereo setup, it's just different. Now, the T13 does not come with a remote control, so you're going to need to get up and adjust the volume on the rear, like I mentioned. Now, also on the rear is a 3.5 millimeter headphone output. So if you're someone that's looking to connect a pair of headphones to a preamp, you can do that as well. Now, a few other features to quickly talk about with the T13. That phono input I was talking about earlier, that is a moving magnet cartridge phono input only, which kind of makes sense at this price point of just $110. Now, the T13 only comes with a USB-C cable for power. It doesn't even come with the wall brick for connectivity. Douk Audio seems to imply that that's because people would just connect this to another source on their desktop, whether that be a laptop or something along those lines. For me, I have a traditional stereo setup, so I had to plug it into a power supply that has USB connectivity. But just be warned, if you order this, it doesn't come with that wall brick, so don't be surprised if it's not in there. And lastly, a lot of people look to preamps for tone controls. The T13 does not give you the ability to use tone controls. However, as I mentioned earlier, if you're using a Weem product like one of their streamers through the RCA input, you could use the tone controls that's built into that app with the Weem streamer with the T13 instead. Now let's talk about a few design features with the T13 because some of these really threw me for a loop. I've already mentioned how strange it is to me that the volume knob is on the rear of the unit, but I also think it's strange that the headphone input is on the rear of the unit. It would just seem strange to have to reach over and sort of guess where that was to plug in your headphones every time you wanted to use it. But that's not all. Now, one thing that you're going to see straight away is that this has dual VU meters on the front. Now, I think most of us would agree that VU meters are fun. It's just sort of a vintage throwback that reminds us of old receivers from the 70s or amplifiers from the 70s or even 80s, and they're just fun to look at. Well, the VU meters on the T13 pack a little surprise. Now, I did not get the proper instruction manual with this unit. So I noticed on the back of the T13, there is another knob. And I was like, what is this knob for? And again, without the right manual, I didn't know. So I just started pushing it and turning it. And next thing you know, the meters have gone from their traditional look to this flashing, what I could only call like a disco vibe. And it totally took me for surprise. That is until I emailed Douk Audio and they sent me the PDF copy of the manual. And I realized that this knob on the back, if you hold it down for 3 seconds, actually gives you the ability to change colors and designs in the presentation. Is that something we need? I don't know. Now, it's worth noting that this sort of flashy one, I think it's like flowing water, maybe is what Douk Audio calls it. This is not in sequence with the music. So the VU meters are sort of giving you some, sense of what the music is doing. But this flashing just happens no matter what. In fact, when the music stops playing, it keeps flashing. And we ended up having a lot of fun with this. Let me give you an example. This weekend, I found this strange Devo CD, Adventures of the Smart Patrol. And all I can find out from researching this is it's soundtrack from the Inkscape CD-ROM game. So I guess at some point, Devo had a CD-ROM game, and these songs are the soundtrack to it. Now, there's a song on here that sounds basically like a robot singing, and it was honestly kind of driving my wife a little batty. And she looked up, and the way I have the T13 sitting on top of my shit-erd transport, it actually kind of looks like a robot with 2 eyes and a mouth. I'll show you this here and see if you can see it as well. Now, my wife's an art teacher, so she's used to pointing out faces in inanimate objects. So I kind of laughed and agreed with her that that was an interesting look. But I don't know. You tell me, what do you think? Are the flashing lights on this T13 necessary? Obviously, you can turn them off and not have them flashing at you. But what a weird surprise to me. It just made this thing so wild. Again, I kind of think it's unnecessary, but it's also a little bit fun and kind of curious what you think. Please let me know in the comments below. So that leaves us with one final question, and that is, did the preamp negatively affect the sound signature when inserted into the audio chain? Now, sometimes you can get a preamp that can color the sound, and I didn't hear any sound coloration with the T13, which for me is a good thing. Now, a lot of people think some of this cheap gear from China can add distortion and noise into a sound signal as well. I did not hear any of that with the T13. It was easy to insert and everything sounded fine. Now, you'll look in the front of the unit and you'll see that you can switch between the phono and auxiliary. Now, I just want to point out that when you're listening to a record through the phono input, it's going to be a lot quieter than when you switch over to the RCA input, which is going to be a lot louder with that volume at the same level. It can surprise you if you're not thinking ahead of time. So as you swap back and forth between those inputs, you'll have to adjust the volume to either match the higher volume with RCA or to boost the lower volume with the phono. Just thought that was something worth noting. Now, how does the phono input sound? Now, this is a $110 preamp, and I think that the phono sounds pretty good for that price point. I use a Vincent phono preamp, which I bought used for like $400. It's an $800 phono preamp traditionally. So does it sound that good? No. I also have a more budget project phono preamp that's a little bit punchier than this one. But I have heard other manufacturers who've tried to squeeze a phono input into another unit, and it has sounded real thin and poor. And that is not the case with this phono preamp. And I think this would be a good sort of preamp for a beginner who's just building out a system with a Class D amp like Fozzy, Douk Audio, IEMA, anything along those lines. And I think they're going to be happy with the way this phono preamp sounds in that system. Well, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, this preamp for me was a little weird and a little wild. The weird thing for me is the design choice of putting the volume knob on the back of the unit. That's strange to me. Now, the wild would be the ability to adjust the meters in terms of colors, whether or not they're flashing. That to me was just sort of a wild design choice that I did not expect. I would love to know what your opinions are on both of those features in the comments below. But I can't stress enough how important I think it is for a preamp that you can connect with some of these Class D amplifiers to have the ability to hook up more than one source. I really thought it was cool that this preamp could connect a turntable and still give you the ability to have one RCA input. That for me is a big win, especially at this price point for $110. Now, this isn't the only Douk Audio product that I've reviewed this year. I recently talked about their T4 external phono preamp, which after a few weeks, I really fell in love using. If you'd like to learn more about that phono preamp, you can do so by watching this video here.